I just want to ask you about Huw Edwards, actually, at the moment. This is another story in the news today. The BBC was apparently warned about his online conduct, this time with an older person, a woman in her 40s, 2 years before the scandal. Lorin, can you just take us through this? I know you've been looking at this morning.
Yeah, I think, you know, this is several months before the other scandals that you're saying. This is, I think it's important to bear in mind, he paid a young person, it was alleged to have paid a young person £35,000 for nude photos of themselves. I think it's the kind of behaviour that I think is often forgotten about in the 24-hour media cycle of this kind of abuse of power, of someone, it is claimed, taking advantage of a younger person. And there seems to be, this report from the Times seems to suggest, a pattern of online impropriety and using that position to send people inappropriate messages.
What about the BBC in this? I mean, if they were warning Huw Edwards about his online conduct, about his interactions on social media with people 2 years before this happened, it doesn't appear from the reporting anyway that this was dealt with particularly well. What's your assessment?
No, it doesn't. I think what I find interesting is a lot of people like to complain, especially on this channel, about our woke HR blob. Well, actually, if the woke HR blob at the BBC maybe had done their job properly, maybe this could have been avoided. I don't know, because I don't know the ins and outs of the BBC's HR scenarios, but it's all...
I work for the BBC. HR is rubbish.
Oh, fair enough then. Well, you know, then clearly they need to do better at that and to put safeguards in place for not just the staff that work there, but also for their presenters if they're behaving inappropriately and their systems aren't dealing with it.
Ben, what's your perspective on this story about Huw Edwards?
Well, I mean, I think it's... you know, first of all, one's got to be quite careful about taking every complaint made by some public profile or someone who's, you know, in the public seriously, because people just want to do it to cause trouble. But there clearly was a pattern here. I think the only mitigant in Huw Edwards' favour, if I can say anything in his favour, is that the lady who made the complaint twice withdrew it, and she's a mature lady.
Although she was asked by Huw Edwards to withdraw it, according to this reporting.
But she did withdraw it. And if you withdraw a complaint, it kind of goes off the record in some senses, doesn't it? But one of the biggest problems I've got with the BBC is that it isn't really regulated in any sense. You know, Ofcom may be the regulator of last resort, but its initial scrutiny is internal, and only if there's an appeal does it go to Ofcom. Not that this is necessarily an Ofcom matter, but it seems to be a sort of a blob of its own jurisdiction and doing as it feels, when it feels, without much scrutiny. And if you're paid by the public without any shareholders, ministers aren't holding you to account, you don't have a proper regulator, it's like any monopoly, it's misbehaving.
Well, there are often people who say Ofcom should be much harder on all channels, including this one, in terms of what we broadcast. I mean, are you in favour of greater regulation?
No, I'm not in favour of greater regulation, and I think Ofcom often overreaches. But the BBC has it's a monopoly funded by the taxpayer, where there's no scrutiny of what it's really up to.
I mean, there's plenty of scrutiny of the BBC.
And well, by the public, but it has to self-police. The policing begins, at least initially, within the BBC, and it's only when it fails to police itself properly does it get into the public conscience, and only then, through the public, can we hold it to account.
And if we're honest, then the reason why more scrutiny is put on the BBC than perhaps other institutions is because it's taxpayer funded.
Yes,
it's because
and rightly so.
And it's because there's a threat of jail for not paying your licence fee that we perhaps perceive a greater sense of ownership and a greater sense of wanting accountability.
And there's no direct mechanism, though, is there, to hold them to account?
No.
There's none. We are the clients, we're the shareholders, if you like, and there's no mechanism by which we can hold the BBC to account.
No.